My mother said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, "We wish you were never born." The sentence landed like a plate dropped. For a beat, the clinking stopped. A fork hung in the air. Somewhere behind me, my manager's laugh cut off mid-toast. The private room at Delmonico felt too small for that kind of sound. It should have held celebration, but it swallowed the syllables and threw them back like an accusation. I am Clare. I was born with albinism. The details beyond that are indefino, and for most of my life, that quiet difference made me easy to overlook. People fixated on the obvious: my pale skin, the light in my eyes, the way the sun made me squint. In rooms full of conversation, I learned to fold myself into the margins. I learned to make myself smaller so others could be comfortable. That night, the room had come to honor a degree I'd worked for: Stanford MBA, a consulting offer, nights that blurred into mornings. My manager was standing, toasting the team, the mentors, the future. Glasses caught the warm light. My father sat with the polite expression he always had, soft eyes, hands that stayed in his lap. My mother sat opposite, the person who should have been least surprised, least silent. Ashley, my sister, was there too, brilliant, practicing medicine, the family favorite in ways that had nothing to do with merit and everything to do with habit. You'd think a degree like mine would change the way people saw me. You'd think accomplishments would overwrite old scripts. They didn't, not at the table that night. For anyone who's been on the receiving end of that kind of dismissal, there's always a lead-up. It's not sudden. It sounds casual at first, a silence when you speak, a story told again with someone else in the starring role, money moved without asking. Over the years, my life added up in ways nobody counted except me. Late-night shifts to cover rent, automatic payments I set up so the household could stay afloat, scholarship money that landed in my account and left my name chiseled on bills I paid. I taught myself to be reliable, because when you are the one no one checks on, you have to be the one who checks yourself. There were moments that should have been proof otherwise. In middle school, I won a regional math competition. My advisor printed a picture and put it on the department wall. He wrote me a note about problem solving and grit. He came to my recital in college and stood at the back, smiling as if I were the thing he'd been rooting for all along. But at home, where it mattered most, my awards were small paper folded into drawers, or simply not mentioned. "That was nice, Claire," my mother would say, and the tone made the compliment feel like a shrug. I remember once, during my junior year, balancing 2 jobs and a full course load. One morning, I called home to say I couldn't cover groceries that week because my hours were cut. My mother told me, without asking, that Ashley would take care of it. Ashley, who was visiting for an internship, who had the luxury of choice. I had long since learned how to make myself invisible and useful at the same time, to be the one people could rely on without needing thanks. If you've ever been made to feel invisible in your own family, I want you to pause for a second and name that one small thing that made you feel unseen. If this resonates, share it in the comments below. You're not alone in carrying those small silences. Back to the restaurant. The toast had been warm. My manager spoke about resilience, late nights, the way I'd turned a messy project into a model case study. People leaned in as if the story were a private film, proud. I looked around the table, waiting for the softening I'd always sought from them, and instead I saw precisely the old choreography, praise directed at me from colleagues, delivered back home as a faint shrug. "She did well," my mother said after my manager finished, but it was the kind of sentence that should have been a sentence. Instead, it landed as a footnote. "We're proud of Ashley," she added, a sentence that arrived with warmth and a glance. It was a glance I had seen 1,000 times, the automatic privilege of the favored child, The way one daughter was always worthy of the story and the other worth a passing comment. Then, almost as if she'd been waiting for permission to be blunt, she doubled down. "We wish you were never born." Those words were framed like a finality I had never considered. Not the "I wish I'd known you better" kind of regret, but the kind that erased you with a clause. People at the table froze because the phrase does not fit in a normal sentence. It is a refusal dressed as speech. It was meant to be humiliating, and it was. It achieved what it intended. I left the room. My exit was not cinematic in the way movies stage it. It was a series of small, exact movements. A napkin slid off the chair as I stood. My heel scratched the tile. I walked out into the rainy Seattle night and let the wet press against my shoes. The city didn't pause for me. People walked by with umbrellas like a moving wall. I remember the taste of salt in my mouth, not from tears yet, but from a sudden, unexpected emptiness where acknowledgement should have been. The private room returned to muted conversations without me. The clatter picked up a couple of chairs down. Outside, I found myself standing under the awning, watching the way the streetlights skittered across wet pavement. I had prepared for speeches and networking, not for being told I should never have existed. For a long time after, I couldn't find the right verb to name what I felt. Shock feels clinical. Rage felt theatrical. What landed was a numbness that wrapped itself like thick cloth. Everything that came after was not a story of heroic rebirth, but of practical decisions. I walked home, not to reconcile in the moment, but to make a small, irrevocable change. For years, I had arranged automatic transfers out of my account. A little act I told myself was kindness and duty. Money moved, fingers tapped, headaches avoided. That night, in my apartment that smelled faintly of lemon and coffee, I opened my laptop and stared at the blinking router for a while, like it might offer a different solution. Then I went to my bank account and canceled the transfers. It felt like saying a blunt sentence to myself. I will not be the only one who keeps this family afloat. I will not be your invisible bank. Financial boundaries are not glamorous. They are a ledger entry and a small red confirmation button. But money is often where emotional labor becomes measurable. By canceling the transfers, I created leverage against the unending expectation that my life would revolve around preventing the household from wobbling. It was the first practical step toward autonomy, a step that had nothing to do with dramatic confrontations and everything to do with putting my own name in the equation. Michael arrived shortly after. He's the person who has practiced being present without spectacle. He came with a scarf and an umbrella and brewed 2 cups of tea without asking me to explain everything. We sat across from each other in my kitchen while rain made a steady sound against the window. "I don't know what to say," he told me. That was probably the most honest sentence of the week. He didn't try to fix the hurt. He put a hand on my knee, not to comfort me into silence, but to offer a small tether in a moment that felt untethered. "I'm done," I said out loud. Saying it felt strange and enormous at once, like beginning a sentence that would reframe decades. I can't keep doing this. I won't let my life subsidize their indifference. Michael didn't ask for details. He simply said, "Then we do this together." That kind of presence matters. It doesn't rewrite what happened, but it creates a new witness to the choice you're making for yourself. After the initial shock, the days settled into a new rhythm. Work became a refuge in the sense that work is a place where competence is visible and recognized. I could walk into a meeting and have my questions met directly, my ideas debated and sometimes used, my hours counted. Colleagues who knew the contours of my life treated me with a kind of straightforward respect that family had never offered. It was not revenge. It was the slow accrual of dignity in places where performance translated to implication. Then a journalist reached out. They had been following a project I led at the firm, a community initiative that translated into measurable outcomes, and wanted to profile the team. The article landed on a day when I was sitting on a plane, and I opened it with a sense that felt close to vertigo. Someone had written about the late nights, the problem-solving, but also the way I navigated being visible in professional spaces while invisible at home. It was a delicate thread, and the writer pulled it through with care. The piece went viral in a way that surprised me. Messages started appearing like small lights on a shore. People wrote things I hadn't known I needed to hear. I saw myself. My mother always favored my brother. I moved a payment each month and felt like a ghost. Strangers told me their stories with a tenderness that made my chest ache, not for pity, but for recognition. Recognition is underappreciated until you realize you've been carrying its absence. The attention was not a cure. It didn't patch the shame or grant a flawless confidence, but it gave me options. Invitations to speak came in. A mentor recommended me for a leadership role. My calendar filled in ways that were less about escape and more about building a life on terms that I set. Success, oddly, became a form of boundary. It made it harder for the people who had minimized me to pretend I didn't exist. A few weeks later, my parents came to my door. They didn't come asking for the warmth of reconciliation. They came with need. Ashley had hit a crisis, the kind that required financial help and emotional coordination. They knew I had the capacity to help. They had watched, perhaps, the news cycles or the article, and understood that I had more than they had assumed. When I opened the door, they looked as they always did, composed in the way that prefers appearances over answers. My mother began with small sentences that balanced sympathy with justification. My father stayed back, as if to soften anything that might land harshly. They asked for assistance matter-of-factly, expecting me to resume the role I was supposed to have always played, the one who keeps things from breaking. I had imagined this moment 100 times and practiced 100 different responses. The truth is, practice alone didn't prepare me for the calmness I needed in the moment. Calmness is not emotionlessness. It's the discipline of clarity. I can listen to what's happened, I said. I will not be the person who fixes everything because you didn't lean in earlier. They looked startled. My mother's mouth tightened. But, she started, as if all parental entitlement is a paragraph with an unfinished clause. You can apologize, I said. You can explain, you can try, but I won't be the unlimited resource for decisions you didn't include me in. If you need money as an emergency, we can speak about it, but I am not rescinding the boundary I set. Consider me, for the time being, as if I never existed in your pattern of taking. The words were decisive and not cruel. They were framed to make the point. I was no longer available for the automatic labor that had been expected. It felt odd to say them out loud, to use a phrase that could cut, but it was necessary because silence had been my undoing for decades. My parents left without a tearful confession or a dramatic exit. They traveled back to the life they had built in their habitual orbit. That absence was part of the negotiation I'd signed up for, a risk I took when I stopped carrying the tab for emotional invisibility. There is a common lie in stories about family rupture, that one moment of bravery wipes clean years of neglect. That narrative comforts people who want neat endings. My story is not a neat ending. It is a continuation of work. Setting boundaries did not result in immediate closure or miracles. It resulted in space, a practical, measurable distance that allowed me to cultivate the life I wanted. Over time, the messages from strangers continued. People told me they quit jobs that made them invisible. Others described turning off auto payments that bled their accounts dry. A woman in Idaho wrote that she'd finally allowed herself to decline a family obligation that had been suffocating her for 20 years. Those notes were not trophies. They were proof that small acts ripple outward. It is a peculiar kind of miracle when a cancellation of automatic payments becomes the hinge for someone else's reclaiming. Professionally, opportunities opened. I took on a leadership role that meant fewer late nights working for someone else and more late nights building something with a team that respected boundaries. My days filled with people who celebrated the work, and the work rewarded me with a steadiness that wasn't fragile. The recognition in the industry was validating in a way that didn't require an immediate translation into family acceptance. Sometimes I still wrestle with memory. There are nights when old guilt arrives like a visitor who refuses to leave. I remind myself that guilt is not the same as responsibility. The costs I paid were real. The hours, the emotional labor, the family dinners I arranged while my own important things simmered on the back burner. But the cost is not an invitation to live forever in that position. On quiet evenings, I stand on my balcony in Seattle and watch the city breathe below. Rain sometimes rolls over the glass, and the sound is steadier than any applause I've had. There is a particular sort of breathing that comes with being present in your life rather than suspended by someone else's approval. It is not triumphant so much as rooted. I found dignity not in proving their words wrong, but in refusing to be erased by them. Being a person with albinism has shaped how the world perceives me in small and large ways. People stare. Strangers ask questions that feel intimate without permission. Public spaces sometimes make my eyes ache in sunlight. Those are part of my experience, but they are not the shorthand for who I am. I'm also the person who led a project that changed a community practice. The one who paid her own rent on nights that she worked 3 jobs. The one who now says no and means it. I say these things because I do not want my story to be weaponized into a single moral, that you must achieve external success to be worthy. That is not what happened to me. Success did not transform my family overnight. What it did was create options and make the choice to hold boundaries easier to keep. My agency, the act of standing up, the clicking of a cancel button, the quiet assertion of "I'm done," is the real pivot. If anything, I learned how to honor the small, steady acts, the appointment I kept for myself, the night I went to bed when everything begged me to do one more thing for someone else, the times I let someone else carry a burden. Those are the bricks that eventually make a floor you can stand on. I am not writing this to shame anyone's parents or to promise that a single gesture will fix years of erosion. Families are complicated. Love and harm can coexist. I am telling you this because I want to show the mechanics of choosing yourself. To set a boundary means to create new habits, and new habits are sometimes lonely at first. They become less lonely when you find the people who bear witness without demanding payment. On the balcony, I often think about the night at Del Monaco and how language can be a removal of presence. My mother's sentence was an erasure, but it was not the final word. Her words did not nullify the years of study, the peer-reviewed projects, the nights I learned to be steady. They didn't change that I had been there for myself long before recognition came from outside. There is a quiet joy in that, not the loud vindication of a movie script, but the softer, persistent joy of being reliable to yourself. If a stranger reaches out and says, "I saw your story and it helped me," that is enough. It is not universal healing, but it is a human connection that counts. If you have ever felt unseen, abandoned, or tasked to carry more than you were taught to expect, I see you. If you have made a practical boundary, canceled a payment, changed a routine, said no, tell me one small thing you did in the comments. It helps us build a map for people who are trying to find the exit from invisible labor. As for my parents, I have made peace, not with everything that happened, but with what I can control. I choose my presence now. If they ask for forgiveness, I will hear it. If they don't, I will not chase it. I have learned to hold space for their humanity and also to refuse the habit of making my life a perpetual rescue. The woman I am now is not the product of one strike or one victory. She is a composite of late-night ledgers closed, of saying no, of accepting help, of reading messages from strangers until my chest felt wider. She is steady, and she sets the terms of her participation. She is not made invisible by anyone's casual cruelty. If this story landed in you in any way, even as a small echo, and you want to hear more stories about reclaiming life after family pain, subscribe. There are more voices that need to be heard, and more afternoons to share the practical steps that carve out autonomy. Tonight, when the city lights shimmer and the rain softens, I breathe. The breath is unremarkable and precious. It is mine. I am alive, visible on purpose, and finally decisive about who I let be part of my life.